Welcome to the Thresholds of Reality, the podcast where we explore unexplained and mysterious events, phenomena, and legends. Today we are joined by Preston Dennett, an author, and he's got quite an impressive resume. Uh, he's worked as a ghost hunter, television consultant, out-of-body explorer, UFO investigator, and many more things. He has written 30 nonfiction books, more than 100 articles about UFOs and the paranormal, and 40 speculative fiction or sci-fi fantasy books. And today he has taken the time to chat with us. So strap in as we explore the edges of the unknown. Great to have you on the show, Preston. Thank you for taking the time. And to start off, just wanted to lay out a little bit of what we were talking about before the show. You've written a lot of books about UFOs. Have you had any encounters yourself with UFOs?
Not growing up. Not until I started researching this stuff, which it turns out is a thing. Because it started to concern me not long after I started doing interviews and researching and writing about this. I did start having sightings. That turns out that's a thing. If you start studying this subject, I think they turn the tables on you and start studying you.
Oh, it's like you stare into the abyss stares back at you.
Exactly. I mean, not even kidding, because it wasn't long after I really was digging in and interviewing people, going to UFO hotspots and writing about this and going on the radio and such, that I did start having encounters. And it started out a little ambiguous. And I was seeing some weird lights and stuff, which just wasn't enough for me. I wanted to see something that was absolutely, undeniably strange, that I could point to and say, no, that's not a shooting star or a satellite or anything like that. And that happened in late July of 1992, actually.
Oh, really?
And by coincidence, I was in the middle of a huge UFO investigation, probably one of the biggest ever, even up to this day. There was a huge wave of sightings over Topanga Canyon, which was my hometown. I had just literally moved out of there last year, in 91, October.
Okay.
To the neighboring area of Canoga Park. But this is like right outside of LA. It's right along the coast. It's a little community. Back then it was about 8,000 residents. And yeah, they were having this huge wave of sightings. So I was interviewing people. I'd called the police, gave them my number, and oh shoot. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
And, was really just in the middle of a huge investigation. And that's when I had this really interesting experience. I was actually over at my brother and sister-in-law's house, which is bordering Topanga Canyon in Woodland Hills. And we were talking about UFOs late into the night, and finally got to the point where, it was 11:30 or 12. And I'm like, I have to go home. I've got a job. I've got to work tomorrow. And it's just a short drive to where I lived at that time, was in a little condominium complex. And had just left their house. This was maybe 2 or 3 minutes away from their house, down this tiny little side street. And I was coming around this very tight hairpin corner. Couldn't go more than 2 or 3 miles per hour. It's really tight and very steep. And I saw what I thought first was a bird swooping down towards my car. Looking up, this was like 200 or 300 feet up to my right. And I saw instantly it wasn't a bird. It looked more like a firecracker or something. At least that's where my mind went. But that clearly wasn't that, because this thing came right down, and it was an orb about the size of, bigger than a golf ball, smaller than a baseball, but thereabouts. It was kind of a bright yellow-white, not too bright. It had hard edges. This darn thing stops right in front of my windshield. And whenever you see something strange, because I've had other sightings since then, your mind starts racing, trying to figure out what the heck this could be. And so I'm like, is this a reflection? I'm holding the steering wheel real tight. I'm at a complete stop at this point. And it wasn't a reflection. I mean, I clearly see this. It was a foot away. It was over the hood of my car.
Wow.
It's looking at me. I mean, I really got a sense that this thing was checking me out. And it moves back and forth 2, maybe 3 times, stops again, goes forward, dives down, goes straight up. And here's where the weird gets even weirder. I don't remember what happened. I forgot about it completely. It left my mind. And, having interviewed a lot of people at that point, amnesia, missing time is a thing.
Yeah.
And
So at what point did your memory cut off? And then does it include all of the sighting? And then at what point did you recover that memory?
The last thing I remember is watching this thing go straight up. But then, it all completely left my memory. Because if I'd seen, every time I see a UFO, the first thing I do is like, oh my God, I call someone up. You're not going to believe what I saw. Or I write it down and so forth. I don't remember any of that. I don't remember going home. I don't remember really waking up the next morning either. I mean, obviously I did, but it had just left my mind. It was just another normal night until about almost a year, 3 months. I'm honestly not sure. But one day, not long afterwards, it just dropped into my mind spontaneously. I'm like, hey, oh my God, I remember this. And
so the whole encounter had kind of been suppressed.
Yeah. Okay. Always, because I'd interviewed a lot of people who had that happen. And they'll be describing, UFO landed next to me on the road. And we forgot about it. I'm like, what? How can you possibly forget something like that? Well, I get it. I totally get it now. And I never did remember fully what happened. Honestly, I do think I had missing time. But,
what was it like to recover that memory?
Yeah.
Thrilling. I was thrilled. I'm like, whoa! It was a little, it kind of came in a real gentle way, so it wasn't like shattering in any way. But I just kept thinking about it, and then it just kind of cemented itself into my mind. I'm like, this happened. I'm 100% sticking to my guns with this. This was not something I imagined. I absolutely remember this. I went back there and stopped at the same exact spot, relived the whole thing. Didn't remember anything else. Still haven't remembered anything else. And it's been 25, 30 years.
So how big was the object that was floating in front of you? Like, now that you have that memory back, like, is there something you was there that you could compare it to, like size wise?
It wasn't big. It was an orb, tiny little thing, about the size of a baseball, or a little less even. But it had solid edges, and this thing was absolutely under control. The whole thing that I remember was a good 20 seconds, a minute. It wasn't like super brief, because I had another experience later on where I was driving along the freeway heading to a UFO group, and an almost identical thing happened. I was surrounded by cars, and I saw something drop down, and I'm like, whoa. And I look, and it was a little ball of light, and then it went straight up. And that was, I don't normally tell people about that, because I'm like, I'm not even sure I saw that. It was so fast.
I've talked about it before, but I have also seen like a ball of light like that. I walked into my brother-in-law, at the time was my friend, but my brother-in-law's backyard where we used to, hang out, and nobody was there. And it was like maybe the size of a basketball.
Oh, wow.
It didn't protrude light like up and around, but only like straight down to the ground. So like the fence didn't light up, but below it to the ground lit up. And it was like I had walked in, and then it was in the back corner. And like as soon as like I made eye contact with it, it started to float towards me.
Oh, interesting.
So I slowly started to back up because I was like, what is this thing, And then, like, the way it was is in between the houses, there was a little path so that you didn't have to, like, go in a gate or anything. And I walked out of that, and it came that same direction, like it was following me. And where we live in Phoenix, I lived next to the I-17 freeway. And we all lived on this, right by this access road. And it floated out, and I was walking down, and it went into the middle of the road, and it just started floating down, like, south. Like, maybe, like, 4.5, 5 feet in the air. And, like, people were coming out of their houses.
Oh, wow.
Like, my wife at the time had lived, like, 4 houses down. And she had come out, and the people in the convenience store had come out, and it just floated off, and then went away.
You're lucky you had other witnesses.
Yeah.
Because it really makes you question your own senses when something like this happens. I've been alone.
So random. Yeah. I couldn't imagine it like how you did. You seen it all by yourself, because it's like, how do you truly tell that to somebody?
Yeah, for me, 1992 was a huge year because I had a bunch of sightings that year, at least 4 or 5, almost exclusively lights. But ever since then, I've had sightings fairly regularly. I mean, I'm counting up to 10, 15 sightings total. Only a few of them are like one, really. Well, let me think about it. 1 or 2 have been what I would call absolute craft, where I could see a structure. But most are just sort of glowing objects.
Do you have any sense of them? You said they look back at you, but do you have any sense they're trying to relay any type of message to you?
Not that time, but yeah, that did happen once, big time. It was so weird because I'd never had that before. It would happen again, but it was in 1994. I'd been interviewing this lady, was having major contact. And by that, I mean she was being taken on board. They had healed her of a cyst in her fallopian tubes. She was in regular communication with them. She had what she believes to be hybrid babies with the Greys. Once they surrounded her bed, she woke up, freaked out, jumped out of bed, and kicked one in the neck. And it fell down. I mean, she had a whole lot of stories.
So you mentioned the Greys. Just for our audience, can you explain what you mean by the Greys?
Yeah, the Greys are probably the most common type of humanoid extraterrestrial being, an ET, that people certainly report to me. And I would say it's probably the most common that people do see, but really there are all kinds. But a Grey is just a short little figure, very much a humanoid or human-looking figure, mostly. By that I mean it has arms, legs, a head. But it's a large head, hairless, often big, dark, wraparound eyes or almond-shaped eyes, very small nose, a little slit for a mouth, just tiny, itty-bitty little ears, or really kind of just holes almost. Wearing jumpsuits often, speaking telepathically.
So when you're talking about the Greys, you're really just talking about kind of the typical idea people have of aliens as they're portrayed in pop culture and described in a lot of these sightings.
Yeah, it's pretty well known in the media. But, people do describe different types of ETs, certainly. But Greys are pretty common.
Why do you think they only just come, like, obviously they've been coming and visiting since there was life and people recording some, however they, recorded, like, why do you think it's that they only like to visit and they don't like to be like
integrated?
Yeah. Or make a bigger announcement. Why do you think they like just to kind of drop in? You think after all if it was for like exploration, you think they would have so much information on us now after thousands of years of, watching and observing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not a super easy question to answer.
I know.
I just want you to tell us what all aliens are thinking. Is basically what.
uh, I think it's pretty clear that they are not interested in landing on our planet and basically upsetting our culture to a degree that we would have to make a major readjustment. But
Kind
they
of
are,
like Star Trek.
yeah, they are absolutely making contact with a lot of people, not just a couple. There's a quote from J. Allen Hynek, who, as you may know, was the astronomical consultant for Project Blue Book, the Air Force UFO study.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically defected from them at one point, realizing that they were covering up the subject. But he said that 1 in 40 people have contact. And some years later, the Roper organization, which does polling, found about 1 in 50. So my point is, this is a lot more common. They are contacting a lot of people, but it's very much sort of a grassroots movement to announce their presence in a way that I think is gentle and respects our boundaries and isn't going to freak us out, because we are a culture that's very much violent, very steeped in fear. And honestly, with this subject being so brutally covered up, people are really ignorant of the ET presence out there. People, don't even believe in this subject at all. And the evidence for it is 100% overwhelming. I mean, it's conclusive. It is there for people who are willing to search for it. So I think they are contacting people, but it's in a way that it's not going to upset our culture.
Now you mentioned having the sightings in Topanga Canyon. Are there other places that you are aware of where there's a lot of sightings? I've heard of places like Mount Shasta, for example. There's a lot of
Yeah,
UAP being spotted near Mount Shasta.
that's absolutely true. Yeah, up in Northern California or the Oregon area, I'm very close to there. There are areas all across the U.S. and the world, for that matter, which seem to be what I would call hot spots.
Mm-hmm.
Upstate New York had a huge wave of sightings in the 80s and 90s. The Hudson Valley wave, it's been called. For some reason, that's particularly active. Gulf Breeze, Florida. Christopher O'Brien is a Colorado-based researcher, and he discovered that the San Luis Valley has far more sightings than the surrounding areas. Fife, Alabama is another apparent hotspot. Arizona definitely has its hotspot. Sedona it has a higher number of sightings than the surrounding areas. Arizona is pretty interesting because it has a lot of copper mines. It's the leading producer of copper.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing a study of UFOs over mines, what gold mines, iron mines, copper mines, uranium mines. And Arizona tripped me out. I could not believe how many sightings they were having over these copper mines.
So like Bisbee.
You named it. Yep, Bisbee has had a number of them. There's in Morenci, they have a copper smelting plant. They've had repeated sightings over that, and one came so low it actually hovered right over the smokestack there, sending down a little probe or something into one of them. Morenci has had a lot of sightings.
My uncle he used to work at that mine.
Oh, you got to ask him. I bet he has stories. Seriously.
Yeah.
It would surprise me a bit. If he hasn't seen something, I bet he's heard something.
So you've got a lot of hot spots, but what about the intensity of the different types of encounters? I mean, sightings, you call that what, a first encounter or first type? Encounter of the first type? You in your books, I know you've got a lot of different books centered on the different types of encounters, like UFOs at drive-in movie theaters, for example.
Yeah, or schoolyard UFO encounters,
Right.
or USOs, unidentified submersible objects.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, J. Allen Hynek, who I mentioned earlier, did break down encounters into a sort of classification system of close encounters of the first, second, and third kind.
Mm-hmm.
So the first kind is just a simple sighting. The second affects the environment in some way. And the third is usually direct contact, or face to face with ETs or being taken on board. But I'm not sure how useful that has been, because some people have sightings and it's communicating telepathically with them. That's more than a simple sighting. You know what I mean?
Right.
But yeah, what's most interesting to me is when people come upon a landed UFO, perhaps, or have face-to-face encounters with humanoids, or actually taken on board. And that's where I focused a lot of my research, is people who are having on-board UFO encounters or absolute extensive contact. So I think there's where you get the most information about what's going on here.
So with that, is there like a commonality that all their stories have?
Yes, absolutely. And it follows a pretty set pattern, to the degree that I'm going to say I could probably predict a good 80%, even more, of what a person's going to say if they say they, been taken on board a craft. And the basic pattern is people will be perhaps driving along outside, or just as often they'll be in their bedroom. A gray will show up next to their bed and say, "Don't be afraid. Come with us," or "Have no fear. You won't be harmed. Get out of bed. We want to talk to you." And the next thing they know, they're being pulled up perhaps a beam of light, or they'll be let out into the living room and the wall is turned transparent, or they're just pulled right through the wall. And there's a craft hovering over their backyard and they're pulled right up into it. Or they're driving along and a UFO comes over their car. Sometimes it will actually take their car and everything into it, but that's more rare. But once on board, people describe very much the same sort of experiences. And usually they will say the interior of the UFO is quite large, sometimes larger than it appears on the outside. So it can be a small craft and you go inside and it's huge. Almost always rounded walls with no corners, no sharp edges. Usually it's sort of a soft, muted white color, or maybe bronzy or metallic, sort of like a brushed aluminum or something along those lines. And often it's not a whole lot of equipment that people describe. It's very sparse usually, but people will describe small little benches, consoles. Often they're taken to a little table for an exam, or perhaps a chair just as often. They describe indirect lighting almost exclusively, universally. People don't see lamps or anything like that. The interior of the craft is just lit up by some unknown source. So after being perhaps physically examined, people, if they're not freaking out, because if you're freaking out, usually you will have missing time at this point, and you wake up and you're back in your car or your bed. But if you're not, they will take you to the engine room, or what we would call the engine room, and they show them how they basically power their craft, which is usually along the lines of electromagnetism, or harnessing the gravity fields or the magnetic lines of our planet, something along those lines.
So the trick is to stay calm.
Yes.
You get the best experience if you stay calm and collective.
Exactly. They will talk to you. Often they will give warnings about nuclear proliferation, our warlike ways. Why are you polluting your planet? You're maybe facing some rough times up ahead. You're going down the wrong path. They really want people to wake up to their own psychic abilities. So they're always communicating in telepathy, and they will tell people, you can do much greater things than you're doing. And people will come away from the experience feeling like they have the ability to do Reiki or hands-on healing, or they'll start having out-of-body experiences. That's what happened to me, actually. I started having lots of out-of-body experiences, but I hear that a lot. Past life recall, precognition, all kinds of. There's a spiritual aspect to this that it does not get the attention it deserves. It's absolutely there. It's almost a rule. But yeah, they'll take you to the observation deck and show you Earth far below. That's very common. Less common, but still pretty consistent, is they'll take you to see the moon. I've got many cases of that. A few of people actually going to other planets in our solar system, which may sound crazy, especially to a skeptic, but I'm telling you, people all across the world are reporting this. And
How
generally,
awesome would that be?
I know. Can you imagine?
Do you find any other patterns of the people that they choose to take with them? Is there something that they have in common, or is it just randomness, do you think?
There is an element of randomness. I think if you're outside a lot, your chances go way up, because we do see a lot of children having encounters while they're out playing, or truck drivers, or night watchmen, or police officers, or people whose vocation, their career keeps them outside. So I think that is a pattern. It's evenly divided between men and women, because I started to get really interested in that. I'm like, hey, why I would love to have an encounter. What can I do? It's evenly divided between men and women. Has really nothing to do with your ancestry or education or religion. Or there was a big talk about blood type. People with Rh negative blood. They're like, they're very interested in that, and that does come up, but it's not at all a hard and fast rule. The patterns I found were a couple. One I already mentioned. If you're out there, on a highway late at night, well, that seems to be a factor. A lot of cases like that. But probably the biggest single factor is that people who have a history of this in their family, it does seem to track families to a degree. If your parents have had encounters, grandparents, aunts and uncles, chances are you will, and your kids. They're very interested in tracking families, apparently along genetic lines. But another is if you display psychic ability, they do seem to be interested in that.
Watch out, Kyle.
I did write a book about healing cases, people who've been healed by UFOs. And that really, I wanted to figure out, why are some people being healed and others? And I did find another pattern, which relates to why people have contact. Because I kept finding that a lot of people who were being healed were social workers. Honest to God, people who were fighting for human rights or animal rights, or environmentalists, or doctors, inventors, police officers, teachers, people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. Musicians, they love musicians. It's
You said they're being killed?
No.
No.
Healed.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. Very different. But no. They're not here to hurt us. I have no evidence of that. Our own government is putting forth an ET threat agenda, but the fact is they're the ones who I'm more frightened of, because they are the ones who are irradiating our citizens, or
or drugging them, MK Ultra style.
Yeah, I think that they are the ones that people should be worried about, not the ETs. ETs don't come down and start wars and kill hundreds of thousands of people and starve people out and steal their property and all this.
The way you describe it, it makes it seem like they're here to date us. They take you out, show you the town, show you the moon, then they show you their car. They're like, check out this engine.
Right?
I got a nice two-stroke.
They're just making friends. I think
Yeah.
that's a very good way of putting it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Got a question from our chat that says, I've been interested in this for some time. Are all aliens friendly, or aren't there evil aliens or not so nice ones?
Well, there's evil people here on this planet, right? And we have not evolved to the point where we can travel to various star systems. If a species gets to that point where they have the technology to travel between star systems, it's pretty much, you can bet on it that they've also become evolved morally, ethically, spiritually, psychically. So the ETs that are visiting us are pretty much exclusively benevolent. I'm not going to, it's a big, big universe.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are other planets out there with people on it like us who are still growing up and having some troubles with, their spiritual evolution. And it's a wide universe. I'm not going to say every single one out there is our friends, but yeah, we do not have to worry. The ETs that are visiting us are 100% benevolent. There are reports of people having a lot of fear with their encounters. It can be very scary for people, especially because we're so into fear and being scared and basically trained to fear everything different. But no, they're not. There's no evidence of that. And I really looked hard because the people who tell me they're having negative experiences, I'm like, what happened? They said, well, they examined me and there was a needle and I don't like doctors and these guys scared the living daylights out of me. That's the worst I hear. I have no accounts of outright sadistic behavior or torture other than accounts of what researchers call my labs, military abductions, MK Ultra type stuff, where our governments are masquerading as ETs and scaring the living daylights out of people, doing horrible things. That does happen. And I think that's why we have some accounts of people who are just losing their minds and are calling ETs demonic, which they're not. I studied the paranormal intensely because there's a paranormal aspect to all this. And some people think it's demonic. No, it's not. No, there are negative spirits. There are angels. There's all kinds of stuff going on here. Bigfoot, ghosts, spirits, near-death experiences. But what's extraterrestrials is a separate thing.
Do you think it's our own pop culture that has given us this idea that the aliens might be not nice? Do you think it's our War of the Worlds and like the movie Independence Day? That's always the aliens coming in not a good way. You think is that what has contributed to us thinking to be scared when those chosen ones go to this ship or whatever?
Yeah, I think there's several factors going on. We have a media that's very fear-based. And when people have encounters that say very friendly and they were taken on board and they were healed, they're not seeking help. Whereas someone who's taken on board and they freaked out and they don't remember it and they just had a complete panic attack over it will sometimes seek hypnotherapy and hypnotic regression. And so that gets more coverage than someone who's taken to the moon, or something like that. I think the fear sells. That's another factor going on. There is a brutal, ruthless cover-up on this subject. It's no joke. It's demonstrable. It's true. Our governments are absolutely covering this up, and we know this is true too. That they're providing disinformation and misinformation and outright lies. They are lying about this subject. We cannot trust them. And they are putting forth, like I mentioned earlier, a false alien threat narrative. It's not true. The only alien threat is to their power structure, to their ability to lie to the people, which is crumbling quickly. So no.
So Preston, I do want to ask you about something along those lines, and it is areas in which you yourself are skeptical. You use the word, you brought up skeptics earlier, but it sounds like you have skepticism in a variety of areas. But the first thing I would ask is, have there been any encounters or claims of encounters where you yourself were skeptical that an encounter had taken place?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Ironically, I came into this field as a complete skeptic. I just didn't believe in people who thought they were seeing UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
But I found out my brother had seen one, my sister-in-law. I've had nephews and good close friends, people at work. So it was a real shock for me. I had to readjust my whole worldview. I really had to dig deep and figure out what's going on, and ironically made me more skeptical. So every time I hear a person talking about this kind of thing, I really have to second guess everything. And I do hear from people I do not believe for a darn second. There's a lot of cases going on, or what would I call it? Stories about
Mm-hmm.
people being, used as a secret soldier for the secret space program and living on Mars. And I'm like, no, I don't believe that. And you can just prove that from a scientific angle, because Mars has no magnetic field. It doesn't. You cannot survive on Mars for any length of time whatsoever. That story cannot be true. And yeah, occasionally I hear from people whose stories are just too wild. I always vet a witness. There's a very careful process you go through to see if someone's telling the truth.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, the vast majority of people who contact me aren't hoaxing. They're very wary. They're concerned about how they're going to be perceived. They don't want their name used. I've never paid a dime for any single interview. I don't do that. People will say something like, I haven't told anybody, I haven't told my wife. I've got a good job. I have no history of mental illness. I don't do drugs. I'm well educated. They're very much concerned about their identity being released.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something people would do to get attention or money. Most have a lot to lose by coming forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a healthy part of the scientific or systematic process of cataloging all of these experiences, right? Is you have to kind of sift through the evidence. But one of the other things that I'm curious to know about is, do you have any skepticism for the alien conspiracy theories themselves? I've looked into several, in context of the show. We often look into things that seem out there. But one of them we looked at earlier in the show, we actually did an episode, was the Majestic 12, which is, it appears to be some sort of council that dictates policy with respect to alien encounters. And what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's probably real. There's been a lot of research into this. Stanton Friedman did a book about this and looked very much into the various figures who were named in the MJ12 papers, which themselves might be partially disinformation. Our governments are very clever. They'll put a bunch of truth and sprinkle it with lies. But one of the so-called members was Donald Menzel, who was an astronomer who was a vocal skeptic, a debunker, and would actually attack people who believed they'd seen UFOs and always said it was Venus or a meteor,
Or weather balloons. They changed their stories from whatever they saw to weather balloons or something like that.
Yeah, and he pretty much proved that this guy was a paid government disinformation agent. And if you look at the figures who are named in the MJ12 papers, these are real people, have very close ties to military government intelligence. So I think, yes, we know through documents released from the Freedom of Information Act that virtually every intelligence agency in the U.S., and let's face it, across the world, have been studying this for decades. The NSA is deep in it. The FBI, the CIA, the highest levels of the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, the military-industrial complex. There's no doubt that they are spending an enormous amount of our tax dollars on this. There's been some public studies like Project Blue Book. They spent a lot of our money. The Condon Committee, the Robertson Panel, these are the public studies. We now know the real studies were going on in secret at the Air Technical Intelligence Command, at places like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, or most of the Air Force bases across the country are implicated to some degree with this subject. There are literally hundreds upon hundreds of whistleblowers coming out of the work now. It's not just Bob Lazar or the few others that are quite well known. There are hundreds of them. I absolutely think there is a group that spends their entire time studying this subject. Yes.
Okay, and one other conspiracy, or maybe not conspiracy, but I'd say unverified topic is Dulce Base. Have you ever heard of Dulce Base?
Yes. Yeah, and I'm not so sure I subscribe to that. That does sound like disinformation to me. I'm not going to say that the ETs haven't had or do have bases here on our planet, because I think there is some evidence of that.
Well, Chinese have police stations in the U.S. now, U.S. and Canada. I don't know if you've heard about that, but I mean, why not?
Yes. I mean, the military, I think, does have undersea bases as well, which is not public. But if you look into that, I think that is going on. So I am not so sure about the Dulce base and the alleged conflict that took place there between Greys and the military. Because I don't have any evidence to support that. I don't think there's any good reporting on it. But there is a lot of UFO activity all across this planet. And there are some areas that do seem to be particularly active. I think there could possibly be some bases here and there on our planet, or certainly on the moon. I think the evidence for that is outstanding.
Tell me about some of the evidence for a moon base.
I first became aware of that when I interviewed a gentleman who was a petty photographer for the Navy in the late 60s, early 70s, and got involved with the ships that were picking up the astronauts. And they bumped him up to a top secret clearance, and he started communicating directly with the astronauts, some of them from the Gemini and Apollo missions. And they told him secretly, off the record, that they saw stuff up there. And he developed a lot of their photographs, which were millions upon millions, of course. But he developed a very small portion and says he saw structures. So I started looking into it, and I realized that there's a whole genre of literature on this. George Leonard wrote a book called Someone Else is on the Moon. There was another book by Glenn Steckling, We Found Alien Bases on the Moon. And there's a whole bunch of books on the moon and the moon anomalies. I realized there's something called, transient lunar phenomena, TLP. This is scientifically accepted. There are thousands of reports of lights on the moon. The light, the moon is not seismically active, and yet these lights are being seen, sometimes in patterns. And I started, talking to a lot of contactees, and some started to tell me that they were seeing stuff on the moon. In fact, one of my most recent books, it's called Symmetry, A True UFO Adventure. It's all about the lifelong experiences of Dolly Safran. She's a former registered nurse. She was an employee for the Department of Defense.
She's in our chat right now.
Wow. Hi, Dolly. Yeah, we're quite close. I've got a lot of friends who are contactees now. But yeah, she was one of the people I mentioned earlier who has lots of contact with the ETs, and she has no fear. She has not needed hypnosis, and they took her to the moon as they've taken others, and they said, look, these are alien bases, or were at one time. They're mostly inactive now. But there's quite a few contactees who report on this, and whistleblowers across the planet. So absolutely, there is stuff going on in the moon. NASA is perpetrating a huge cover-up. This will come out one day. NASA's been nicknamed by reporters never a straight answer. It's not National Aeronautic Space Administration.
What are they guilty of?
Covering up the fact that we found stuff on the moon, that our Apollo and Gemini missions were basically followed to and from the moon by craft, that they have found absolute hard evidence of extraterrestrials on the moon. So I think that will come out at some point. Certainly a huge number of NASA insiders have already said so. People like Maurice Chatelain, who wrote a book on it, Chris Kraft. I mean, there's a bunch of them who have come forward and said NASA's lying about what they know.
I think Tony here has an interesting question. It says, how can the aliens be both physical and non-physical? They can go through walls and then be physical in the room. Have they ever explained this to anybody, how they can do this?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I will say, just as an underlying point here, that all entities have physical and non-physical aspects to them. We ourselves are interdimensional. And there are many accounts of people who've reached very high levels of psychic development who have physically levitated, who have moved through walls, who teleport. These accounts aren't super well known, but they are in every culture. They stretch back 2,000 years at least. So this is something the ETs have mastered both psychically and technologically. And we are just beginning to learn how to do these kinds of things, such as levitating objects with lasers or interpenetrating solid objects. But we are starting to figure this stuff out. The ETs have known how to do this for eons, for millions of years. They are so far advanced of humanity that it's hard for us to even fathom their technology. There are accounts of UFO crash retrievals where our government has basically gotten a hold of some of these craft, and there's a few we can't even open. And there are some that we get inside and we can't find how the craft is powered at all. There doesn't appear to be any engines. They're basically driven psychically. This is how advanced the ETs are. But their use of the electromagnetic spectrum is mind-blowing. That's how they do this stuff. They can levitate people in a beam of light. They can render solid objects invisible or permeable. They can heal with a beam of light, communicate, do all kinds of things. So basically, their understanding of light is how they're doing a lot of this stuff.
Maybe that's why they like to study us, because we're so non-evolved.
Yeah, I think they're very concerned about our use of nuclear weapons, because we are on the verge of destroying ourselves. And a message that a lot of contactees are getting actually is that our planet is going through a cycle and it's near the end of it. And we're reaching a point where there's going to be an existential crisis. And this planet will have to be evacuated. So they're basically on a gung-ho mission to announce their presence and let people know that we have friends out there, and that at some point they may actually step down and scoop people up off this planet, which may sound crazy to a skeptic, but I challenge skeptics. If you don't believe in UFOs, I dare you to look at the evidence. Start asking your friends, your family, people you trust, your coworkers. I think you'll be really shocked to find out not only is this real, the evidence for it is overwhelming. It's not just sightings. There are landing traces, hundreds of them. There are medical effects, hundreds upon hundreds of cases of people being healed with doctor reports. There are implant removal cases. There's photographs. There's animal reactions. There's electromagnetic effects. There's angel hair. This is a weird substance that comes off of UFOs on rare occasions, but it's been collected and analyzed in scientific labs all across the world. The evidence is overwhelming.
Well, Preston, the pending event you just described sounds very similar to the Christian idea of the rapture. You know, you're going to be carried away for your protection because you're part of the righteous or what have you. Is there a conflation, do you think, between biblical angels and UFO or alien encounters?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible in some cases. And when I started hearing about, angels, I thought, I'd better look into angels. Let's see if this is real. And the literature on it is incredibly compelling. I think there's something to it in terms of good spirits or guardians out there who will rescue people or heal people. However, I think a lot of what people were reporting back in the Middle Ages and onward was being misinterpreted or mislabeled. In fact, there's a lady up in Maine who I interviewed who's had very extensive encounters, had a fully conscious encounter with her half human, half ET son, a hybrid, and spoke to her in detail about this sort of thing, gave her all kinds of information, said that they're watching over us very closely, especially her, that she needs to warn people to stop putting out greed and negativity, that our environment is going to go through some major changes in terms of the weather and hurricanes and disasters. They told her that they have been watching humanity's genetics since biblical times, upgrading it, protecting it, and actually helped improve the genetics of dogs and cats specifically to strengthen their emotional intelligence, to relate better to humans. This is what they told her. But they also told her if people should start disappearing from this planet, it's being done by us for the universal good, and who you thought were angels was us. That was us, they told her. So yeah, I think that does come up. And I think what we're seeing now as extraterrestrials, calling extraterrestrials, is exactly that. I don't think we're misinterpreting it. I don't think this is a mysterious phenomena that's putting on different masks, as some researchers have posited. Don't think there's any compelling evidence of that. I think we're dealing with people very much like us, more alike us than different, from other worlds, but just more advanced.
I want to show just a picture here real quick off my screen, and get your take on it. So this is described as the biblically accurate angel, and it's concentric rings with eyes and wings. It doesn't look anything like the cherubim or the seraphim that we're familiar with. To me, this looks very much like a lot more like UFO that we're familiar with than an angel that we're familiar with.
Yeah, I think the wings would be a symbolic way of saying, look, this thing is flying.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the eyes could be, portholes or lights, or, the rim of the craft, the circumference. It's hard to say. That was a long time ago. We weren't there. So I'm very wary of over speculating on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's clear to me that they have been around for millennia. I mean, we know this. There's ancient writings across the world that talk about, quote, sky gods coming down, teaching us and starting civilization. And we've got cave paintings and petroglyphs and, rock carvings and I mean, it just goes on and on. The Romans reported UFOs. They called them flying shields because that's how they, could see it in their culture. Like, what are those things up there? They're metallic looking. They look like flying shields.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's clear to me they've been around for a very, very long time. And we've just misinterpreted it or not quite figured out what's going on here.
Well, as we're starting to run out of time, I did want to kind of direct people to your website where they can find a lot of your work. And I'm going to share that real quick here. So it's prestondennett.weebly.com. And you've got not just the books titles, but you also have excerpts available here on this website for all of our listeners who are interested in checking out more. You've written 30 nonfiction, but you also got some fiction too, entertainment books. And I was fascinated myself with the specificity or the categories of things that you were exploring and compiling in each of these books. About how long does it take you to produce one of these books?
Oh, it's kind of a trick question because the research honestly takes years. But writing the book itself, I would say anywhere from 2 years to, in some cases, 6 months if all the research is done. But you have to do interviews, you have to follow up on the interviews. If it's a specific subject like schoolyard encounters, research on that took a year, but I wrote it up in a few months, and then have to go proofreading and do fact checking and all the kinds of things that go into this. So yeah, it takes about a year, I would say. I'm putting out 2 books per year. I'm doing this full time now. So I'm having a lot of fun with it, but it's an absolute labor of love. It's a lot of work.
If one of our listeners did want to reach out to you about one of their experiences, they can do that through your website?
Yes, absolutely. I've got my email there posted in several places on the website. Always love hearing from people, even if they have a comment or a question. But yeah, if they've got a story to share, absolutely love hearing from people. You can find a lot of stuff on my website. I mean, there's enough there where you can pretty much educate yourself on this subject. And I'm all over social media, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. My books are available on Amazon for a nice, reasonable price. I'm not out to make money on this by any means. Any writer will tell you you don't get a whole lot of money from books unless you're, a huge bestseller. And this subject just isn't. It's very much marginalized. It's a very rare UFO book that hits the New York Times bestseller list. I think there's been maybe 5 in all of modern history.
It has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Preston. The depth and the broadness as well of your knowledge and experience in this topic is fascinating. I feel like an hour just really doesn't do it justice, but you've got so much available online. I want to make sure everybody goes to Preston's website. He does have a lot of excerpts, and hopefully that triggers you to read more and purchase some of his works, if not all of them. Get the whole set. But otherwise, make sure that you follow Preston on his social media and check out some of his YouTube videos. He's got quite a few of them listed on his website as well. And in addition, make sure that you reach out to him. If you had some experiences of your own, make sure you reach out so they get into the compendium as well. And otherwise, if you like the content that we provide, we sure appreciate your likes and your comments and your subscriptions. We appreciate everybody in chat. Thank you for tuning in, especially Dolly Saffron, man. You mentioned her, and then poof, she's in the chat. That was awesome. And until next time, keep on examining and exploring the edges of the unknown.